Well, it's been a weird start to the season for the Mets, and we're going to get into a couple of the reasons why. Offensively, some issues. Defensively, lots of issues, especially last night in Chicago. We'll get into Chili Davis, Francisco Lindor, little Jeff McNeil. Plenty to discuss on this episode of the Shea Anything Podcast, brought to you by Verizon. It starts right now. All right, welcome to the show. A reminder to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we appreciate it. If you give us a good rating, that helps us out. If you comment, if you subscribe, if you download, that all helps us. Shea Anything, by the way, now brought to you by Verizon. 5G built right for the Mets from the network. More people rely on only on Verizon. That is my first read of our new sponsor that we're very happy to have. I'm told that while I was at my remote location, Andy was taking over the hosting duties earlier this week. Let's take a listen to how he read his first Verizon sponsor read.
John, do you want to hear some exciting news before we talk baseball?
Always.
Well, Shea Anything is now brought to you by Verizon. 5G built right for the Mets from the network more people rely on, only on Verizon. As a lowly writer and reporter, I would like some feedback on how I did with that read. That would normally be Doug's job. How was that?
Yeah.
Semi-professional?
Sounds professional to me.
Well, Harp was impressed. I'd like to say that one was okay. Obviously there was more oomph than the boring read that you just did for this episode. But my third one was, by that time I was just freewheeling. I was really feeling it by the end of the show, and I felt that my final read was the best.
Okay, so let's start with Louis. He has an interesting decision to make now kind of every night at third base. And it was made even more interesting last night with JD Davis, another rough night in the field for almost everybody on the Mets, but specifically for him because we're all watching him closely. And, you know, what's funny is you can see the way he plays right now that he knows we're all watching closely, because he's watching the ball slowly into his glove, and that hurt him on a couple occasions. So I wanted to play this clip of Luis Rojas talking about JD's reaction when he came out to the mound for a mound visit, and potentially taking those defensive issues he's having to the plate as well.
And it was hard on himself. When we made the pitching change, you could see his frustration a little bit. He was he had a tough phase on, and he was, mad at himself and saying some stuff there. And best you can do there is to, keep him in the game. I thought even to his at bat, the first two at bat that he had were quality, right? Drove in one of the runs, and now the third at bat, he wanted to do too much. He struck out on three similar pitches that were out of zone. So and after that, he wanted to do too much. I thought so much you can control. Errors are going to happen. And like I said, you just got to look forward. You got to stay positive, learn from them. And that's the way to approach it.
Quickly, Andy, can I just tell you where I am mentally?
Please.
It relates back to this. Watching the Mets, I cannot help but feel for them a little bit, considering the odd start to their year. The COVID delays at the Nationals, all the rainouts, the snow out, but not just the delays. It's the fact that, they're playing in weather that I think you would agree is just not meant for baseball to be played in. Right. And I know that they're professional athletes and they're paid to play baseball, which is awesome. But I mean, it just doesn't look like fun. So it'd be one thing if it were June or July and the weather's great and it's mid-season and we're trying to figure out if JD Davis can field a baseball. It's another when it's 30 degrees and breezy at Wrigley Field, where the lights barely work, and we're still judging it through the same lens. Having said that, Luis Guillorme is so good that is, to me, what makes this conversation interesting. JD Davis is exactly the same player defensively, I think, that he was a couple of years ago, where we first saw these throwing issues come up in Miami. We knew he wasn't a great defensive player. I think it's the fact that, and I'd be curious to see if you agree, that Guillorme is just so clearly a good player, and so obviously there is an option at third base that has kind of made this conversation more interesting.
Yeah, I don't think that there's any reason to talk about J.D. Davis not being the third baseman, actually, unless he has the thing. And I was surprised but appreciative of Terry Collins on BNNY on Wednesday mentioning that, because usually that's taboo. In fact, Gary and Ron the night before were like, oh, something's going on there. And I knew what they were hinting at. But Terry came out and said it. To be clear to our listeners, if you don't know, the thing is the yips, the knobloch, the whatever, like the mental thing that gets in your head. Baseball people call it the thing. And that can become a kind of storyline that can really bring down a guy, bring down a team. And we see Davis overthinking, so that's a concern. I actually feel bad even talking about it. Like, you're not supposed to. I don't work for the Mets or for J.D. Davis, but it's like, oh, I'm sorry, we're talking about the thing. But it's right there. Even Terry saw it. But that aside, Doug, I think he's in a different level than Luis Guillorme. Luis Guillorme is a really good bench player for a good team to have. I think he's getting overvalued a little because of Davis's struggles. He knows how to handle a bat better than your typical slick fielding backup infielder, which is great for the Mets. But Davis is a really good hitter. And if he can just be not thingy at third, then we're good. If he could just be bad, but not, mentally off, then roll with it. Other than your matchups and your things, and you get Guillorme a day, you get VR a day. It's not like, that was the plan all along, but I don't really see a third base controversy here.
Is there a chance that in 2 or 3 years, J.D. Davis will be the player that, we all kind of think he is, a very solid big league player, and Luis Guillorme will be, a bench light hitting utility infielder? Yes. And I'll look back and be like, well, clearly, Doug, it was another example of you getting too in the weeds and getting too kind of, drawn to the conversations, the competitions, that kind of thing that happens early in the season. But at the same time, like, Guillorme has shown that he can hit 300, which I think is interesting. He puts together great at-bats. And if you listen to Jerry Blevins and the way he described facing him, like, he's an actual big league pitcher who's tried to get him out before. Like, that's valuable to me. That
the second half of that sentence, and you're just a stupid writer. Like, yes. That you just didn't say that part.
I was hoping it would stay kind of unsaid, but
it was there. Look, I'm not putting down Guillorme. I'm just saying Davis is better, and as long as he doesn't have the yips, what are we talking about? Maybe he does, though, and that's a different conversation. That's all I'm saying.
Don't you think, though, Andy, that there's a difference between, like, I have a feeling that part of your point is, like, guys, just the guy who doesn't get enough playing time is always the fan base's favorite player, right? Like, it's like the backup quarterback in the NFL, where somehow you just always think that something different will be something better, which is almost never the case, which, point taken. But isn't it also true that Luis Guillorme could be a really good player, and he's not just the guy that, like, you're kind of interested in, and he's potentially more than that and could be a really good defensive player who hits 300? I think.
I don't know. I'd have to look at how many at-bats he's had in a given season and all that. I didn't come completely prepared for, like, a deep dive on his offense. He's a good player. What do you want from me? He's a really good bench player for a team to have that can capably start and be far from an automatic out. And he looks like a catcher. But yet somehow is a slick fielding.
I think you're just very attached to the idea that he looks like a catcher.
Wouldn't it be weird if, like, Wilson Ramos was like a slick fielding middle infielder?
I would, but
anyway, that's my feeling about the third base situation. I would overall, and I see that you feel differently, and I respect that. This is America. This is what we do in this country. We have a free exchange of ideas. I will say overall too, like, with the Mets, it's sort of, I felt like you were rightly sympathetic to the fact that they've had a weird stop and start and that they look bad in the particular game that we just saw on Wednesday night. But I think the Mets are really in a good place overall. I think that my pick that they were going to win the NL East, I feel better about it now that I've seen them play for this period of time. And I find it really interesting. So I'm on both the Mets and the Yankees Zooms most days, pre and post, on two laptops, like muting and unmuting, like depending on who's up and what's going on. And I was genuinely surprised yesterday when I heard the general tenor of questions to the Mets and to Luis Rojas as like, oh, Louis, gee, what's going on? It's like, guys, I'm watching the Yankee stuff, and like that's really bad. That is a team in a bad place. The Mets are like, they got pep in their step. They're good. They're gelling. They had a terrible defensive effort. They got blown out. They've had some issues like any other team. And I just think things are good on the field for the Mets right now, especially compared to the other team I cover.
I think that that's a very good point. And by no means am I saying like, God, what a disaster of a start for the Mets, and you should feel bad for them because they're playing in cold weather. It's more just like they look pretty good, and this has been really weird. Like I'm trying not to.
You mean like the
just in the team in general. Like I'm trying
think about
not
how much more impressive that obviously makes their pretty good play, considering they're not really playing much.
And specifically, Andy, I was looking at the JD Davis thing, the Lindor thing, which we'll talk about in a second too. Like trying not to get into specific player struggles, not just because it's early, because it's easy to always say that it's early. More specifically, because it's just been so strange. Like playing in Colorado in that weather, playing in Chicago in this weather, the rainouts early in the season, waiting on opening day for your season to start. I'm going to give everything on this roster a little bit more time than I think I normally would to kind of overreact. So once again, you're listening to the Shea Anything Podcast, which is brought to you by Verizon. 5G built right, for the Mets. From the network, more people rely on only on Verizon. I have Verizon. I got to tell you, I get service everywhere. Everywhere.
I don't know if I have. I think I do. I actually don't know. No, I do.
It's the
wonderful.
People have those conversations with their friends, right? You're in a car driving somewhere and you're like, oh, I have no service. You're like, you have Verizon? You're like,
sometimes I'm just in a car with my friends and it's quiet and I'm like, I love Verizon. And everyone's like, I get it, dude.
Get it. Come on. Okay, so I think we kind of we get it. The bats are struggling. Nimmo got off to a really good start. Other than that, everybody's kind of had their struggles. Pete struggled a bit, even though he hit one about 500 feet last night. Dom Smith has struggled a little bit. Not really worried about him. So let's kind of do a deeper dive than usual going through the three batter rule, and we'll get to some of the offensive struggles and the reasons for it as we move forward. The two bats. We're going to do Chili Davis third, the Mets hitting coach, and I know you want to talk about that and some of the things he said the other day. The two bats that I want to discuss specifically are Lindor first and McNeil second. So you wrote a column about Lindor that I thought was funny because it was like you acknowledged the elephant in the room that was like, I know it's early, but like he's not hitting the ball hard. And I thought that was kind of the perfect timing for you to write that because Mets fans, even the most rational Met fan who's like not on Twitter, is watching the games and not throwing anything if they lose and is just a fan of the team, is looking back at last year being like, I don't know this player that well, and he had a rough year last year. We just gave him $340 million. Who is this guy? And so I know you talked to some people and they told you some things about him.
Yeah, well, there's just two different ways that evaluators look at Lindor. One is that, like, shut up, he's awesome. Like, come on, he's awesome. Like, literally, you get some of that. And teams have told me that, hey, we would have been all over him if we could afford him, good on the Mets for getting him. There's definitely that. But there's also been a perception of like, hey, these underlying trends for a couple of years now have been going in the wrong direction. It's a little weird because he's still so young, but he doesn't barrel the ball like he did a couple years ago. He doesn't, and this includes 2020, obviously, which you kind of write off in some ways because of the shortened season. But some of it goes back, I think, a little bit to the year before. In fairness, he's hit 30 home runs multiple times out of the shortstop position. So, what we're talking about here is a very, very good player. But when you talk about the elite offensive shortstops, he's obviously not in that league of like Corey Seager or like the top. But he's probably a notch below. You just like wonder, what does he settle into now as he gets into his prime years? he hit the ball well, obviously, in spring training. Some of that's against legit pitching. Some of that probably isn't because it's spring training. But this was alarming. At the time that I wrote 2 days ago, he'd had 46, I think, or about that, batted balls this year, and had barreled 0% of them. Which, if you to take the 0% and convert it to numbers, that's 0 numbers of barreled balls. Now he has 1 because he had a home run last night. This is all per Baseball Savant. That ball was considered barreled. So 2% of his hits right now have been barreled. Below the 50th percentile or worse in exit velocity, hard contact, all these underlying metrics. And that is what it is. It's right there. Yeah, it's cold. Yeah, it's intermittent. And I wrote it a tad early because, that's what we try to do is stay ahead of the curve a little bit.
So Lindor contributed to one of those messy errors last night at Wrigley Field, Andy. Defensively, like when I listen to you say he's not in the top tier of shortstops, like a Seager, maybe offensively. Like
no, he's in the top tier. He's not like Seager, and he's probably not Story. He's probably right after that.
But that's one of those things I have to keep reminding myself when you say that, because it's not just like his offensive game is just a piece of it. So defensively, have you seen the guy you thought that he would be in a Met uniform?
He's been great. He's charismatic. I love that game-ending tag with a little oomph and the chest pump, but it's not just that. He makes almost all the plays. He's so good out there. Obviously, no one spends $30 million a year on a defensive wizard only. So that's not going to cut it if that's the highlight of his game. It'll be if it's the ratio of defense to offense right now is not what they're paying for. But that aside, the defense is great. And I really thought it was a cool moment. And I contrasted it to, I'm telling you about going between the two Zooms. I'm watching Gleyber Torres and Francisco Lindor, the 2-star New York shortstops, on 2 Zooms last night. And Torres came out and said like what he was supposed to say about how he should have hustled the first and the bad play in the Yankee game. Our listeners don't need to worry about detail about that. It was like, yeah, whatever. And then he posted some cryptic Instagram thing a couple hours later about people are negative or something. Lindor was like, he got up there in the podium and there was that play where he bobbled and then he rushed the throw. It was a really unwise throw. And a guy who's a superstar like Lindor, especially a defensive superstar, was like, yeah, the game sped up on me after I messed up the play at first. Shouldn't have made the throw. Then he talked about how him and McNeil got too close to each other and got in between on a ball. He's like, Jeff and I will learn each other. That probably won't happen again. I just thought it was so like calmly accountable and showed such a confidence, but not arrogance. Arrogance is like, who are you to question my defense? Confidence is, yeah, I screwed that up. I'm going to admit it and probably won't happen again soon. I was very impressed by the way he conducted himself after that bad defensive night.
Yeah, that just shows an awareness again. An awareness that he knows he's great, but not the I'm going to tell you how great I am. Like that's the true sign of somebody who has confidence in his game is like, I can talk about the error I made because it's not going to happen again. And I know exactly what I did wrong. But I have to say that I'm lacking some confidence in myself coming off vacation. This has been kind of a bumpy podcast. I plan on posting something cryptic to Instagram after this episode about the people who are kind of being negative and dragging me down.
Your generation of people that play baseball, people you raise that play baseball, can be very defensive sometimes. There are all kinds of cryptic Instagram posts happening when guys get criticized. And tweets all the time. There's tweets.
Lots of tweets. Let's talk about Jeff McNeil and for our second 3-batter rule. And again, I want to practice what I'm preaching here. I don't want to overreact to his start to the season, but the numbers are glaring. Spring training never really seemed like himself. Is there any concern, Andy, that maybe he's gotten, I don't know, he's trying to figure out who he is and that there's any level of concern that maybe the Jeff McNeil of old is struggling to be himself at the plate?
Well, people like Chili Davis and Keith Hernandez are persistent in their call for McNeil to be one way use the whole field and all that kind of stuff. The DJ LeMahieu type hitter. And McNeil seems to be caught in between on that and the home run guy that sometimes he seems to want to be. I can understand where the player's coming from there too. Guys, coaches, older coaches and broadcasters and things can say lots of things, and you have to know who you are and who you want to be. So, that's a tough one. But the results, I'm just looking at his peripherals. We were talking about Lindor, a 32 percentile on average exit velocity, 24 percentile hard hit, expected slugging 54th percentile, barrel percentage 32nd. You get the point. He's like low in the league for a guy that's got elite bat to ball skills. His hitting coach said in a news conference Wednesday was Jeff's going to be fine because once he finds it, he's just going to go on a tear. And that's probably true. You remember how bad he looked at the beginning of last season, and then didn't he hit like 400 in the second half or the second 30 games or whatever?
Right, couple weeks.
Yeah, he's so talented that it's hard to imagine that it won't be okay.
Let's see. I'm going to look at the splits for the second half. Yeah, I can't say I'm worried about it. And again, that goes back to kind of what I was looking at and talking about at the start of the podcast, which is that if you look at the schedule and everything like that, it's just been a weird start for them. And I have no doubt that Jeff McNeil is going to have a solid season, and the numbers at the end of the year are going to be fine. It's just that, I mean, like you said, the numbers are so un-McNeil-like, and spring training is so interesting too. Talk about another thing that we tell ourselves not to focus on, but you add it on, just like I just did. Well, the numbers to the start of the season aren't great, and he didn't look great in spring training.
That's true. Spring training is so tough, as you know, because like so many things are just weirdly different once the season starts from spring training. Like the Yankees looked great. Okay. Why don't they anymore? It's kind of confusing. But also when you talk about judging hitters specifically, obviously, and this doesn't bode that well for McNeil, but you're facing pitchers who aren't trying to get you out so much as they're trying to work on stuff. And then, especially early in spring, for like the second half of the game, you're facing guys who are going to be in the minor leagues a lot of the time. So struggling in spring for hit. But then again, hitters are also trying to find their timing, and some of them want 40 to 60 at bats in spring to feel it. So it's just pretty hard when it's not like honest competition, which spring training isn't. It's like working on stuff. It's hard to do much with that, but I agree that when you watch games, whether they're exhibition or regular season, McNeil hasn't looked good in 2021. So I don't know. When I'm disappointed by, the one thing that's unfortunate to me about having fans back is that it was fun last year to hear him swear on television loudly all the time when he looked bad, and we don't really get that anymore with actual crowd noise. So I kind of miss that.
I'm sure the
after the swing and miss, or the
higher ups at SNY who are listening to this agree with you that they miss the loud curse words on our air.
Well, I don't know how this kind of thing works, but I can't imagine that the FCC can punish you for Jeff McNeil's frustration. What are
No, you can't be punished. It's just, it's a family broadcast. All right, so last year, again, it's so weird. I'm not even going to give you first half, second half, but in July, which was 8 games, McNeil hit 296, fine. But August, he hit in August, which was 20, he hit 258. So by that time, it was like, what's the deal? Then he hit 356 in September and October with 1,000 OPS. So again, he can get hot and get hot quickly. But you mentioned Chili Davis, so let's do that for our third 3-batter rule. Another line of questioning that if you zoom out was kind of interesting. It's like, Chili, all these guys are struggling. What's the deal? How are you communicating with Francisco Lindor, superstar who's not hitting, as a hitting coach? And you're right that like things aren't that bad. Very well in a couple of weeks, everybody could be on fire and we won't be talking to Chili Davis. First of all, quickly, is he made available because guys are struggling? Like, is there anything to read into like when we're able to hear from a hitting coach? Is that because things are bad?
Maybe a little. I mean, the PR staffs when with these Zoom things, just I think they try to do their best to bring you people in a certain rotation. that is relatively newsworthy. And I think both the Mets and the Yankees staffs have done a very good job with this. Like probably just sensing like, hey, they might want to talk to the hitting coach. Hey, Chili, what day can you do it? So sure, I'm sure it's somewhat related to that. Just like
So
they tend to bring you the starting pitcher from the next day or a guy who's in for some way, shape, or form in the news. So that's sure. Yeah, I'm sure that had something to do with it.
What did you think was notable about what Chili said?
Well, I think he's an interesting figure overall with the Mets because he's very, very much not the type of hitting coach that Sandy Alderson would hire. I mean, there's no way he'd have this job if Brody hadn't hired him. They kept him, obviously, not because this front office would say like that's our guy, but because like honestly, more like he's under contract and how many changes can you make in one off season? He was kind of hanging in the balance for a while. What I mean by not Sandy's kind of guy is there's different kinds of hitting coaches. Some are really about approach and working with people where they're at, and some are more about like philosophy and mechanics that are more tailored toward more of a standardized philosophy. Like Dave Hudgens was a very Sandy Alderson hitting coach. He had this whole thing of like attack pitches in the strike zone, hunt strikes that he taught to most people, but to most hitters. Sandy has typically liked that sort of thing rather than Chili's more like a little bit more old school. So I don't know what the future is there, but I will say that as a teacher and as a human, I really liked what he had to say about like, what are you telling Lindor? And he's like, I'm listening. I'm asking questions. I don't want to overburden these superstars who know what they're doing with all this advice from me. You know, Chili Davis is a really good hitter, by the way, for a long time in the major leagues. So it's not like he couldn't carry himself with a little bit of that. But I just like the idea of, as a former teacher myself, even, I really was impressed by, it's not about what do I know and need to fill you up with my knowledge. It's about who are you? What are you bringing to the table? What do you want to know? And let's start a dialogue that way. I think that makes him a really natural teacher, whatever his philosophical stance may be. I like his communication skills.
Right. And Sandy, do you think that he was listening to that and was impressed by it as well? Or is he so blinded by, what he thinks a hitting coach should be telling his hitters and what his philosophies are that there's really nothing that Chili Davis could say publicly that would change his perception of him?
Probably more the latter. But there's a lot of bigger things that an organization faces other than who your hitting coach is. It's obvious this is a whole other side discussion, but overall, it's not the most important job probably to a team's success or lack of success. So if the hitters really love him and if the offense is rolling along fine and if the Mets make the playoffs this year and they hit well, they'll have a contract decision to make on Davis in the offseason. We'll see what happens. We'll see who the GM is. We'll see a lot of things. So who knows? But I'm just saying, like, he's not the guy that Sandy would pick out of a group of interviewees to say, like, that's my guy. That's right. I'm not criticizing Davis. I'm just saying, like, they seem to come from different places a bit. But that doesn't mean they have a personal issue. That just means
right.
Job.
I would look at it like, okay, if hitting coach isn't the most important position on a team, then the hitters do love this guy. From everything we've heard, they love his view of hitting. It's worked for Dom Smith. It's worked for Jeff McNeil, lots of the guys in that clubhouse. And if he is so clearly sending the message out there publicly that he trusts his hitters and that he's not there to say, hey, media, yeah, I'm the smart guy who's going to fix Francisco Lindor, then that's enough. I mean, for me at home, that's really impressive. And like you said, this is a really accomplished hitter in his own right. So I think that says a lot about him. And I think it's interesting the point you make about being a former teacher and the listening part, because that's a big part of the job. It's not just hours, hitting and in the back of the stadium where they're in the cage and just analyzing swings. It's also conversations and a lot of listening, to your point. All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Shea Anything Podcast. Please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. A reminder, it's brought to you by Verizon, the only network for me, and the Built Right network, the Built Right 5G network for the New York Mets.
I understand exactly what that means.
Yeah, I do too. It's the network that more people rely on. It's Verizon. Our thanks again for them sponsoring us. We're very excited about this partnership. Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. Andy, thank you. We will talk to you next week. Have a good one.